guys. In this tutorial, we will talk about loops in Python. So let's get to it. Loops. So loops is another of those fundamental concepts in Python. Basically, if you find yourself repeating the same block of code over and over again, there is a high chance that you can rewrite that as a for loop or as a while loop. So that is basically the motivation why we need to learn about loops in Python. Okay, so let's start with defining what are loops in Python. So loops in Python are control structures that let you repeat a block of code multiple times. Okay, they are essential for tasks that involve repetition, automation, and processing large amounts of data. So Python supports two types of loops. So first we have for loops, and then we have while loops. And the big difference is in how do they work. So for loops, we need starting point and we need an ending point. So basically that's going to be the iterator or the iterator variable, okay? It's very common that practitioners use I, J, K, one of those letters as the iterator, okay? But again, we need a starting point and we need an ending point for the for loop. While loops are slightly different. So for a while loop, we need a condition that is going to be checked, okay? And as long as that condition is true, then that loop will keep running. And that brings us to the question of how do we make sure that the loop stops? So inside of the code or inside of the block code, in the while loop, we need to make sure that at some point the loop stops. Otherwise, you may run into what is called an infinite loop, okay? But yeah, that's basically it. Those are the two types of loops that we have in Python. We have for loop and we have while loops. So for loops, remember that we need a starting point and we need an ending point. And for while loops, we need a condition that is going to be checked. And what we need to make sure is that condition at some points it breaks the loop or it stops the loop in some sense. Okay. All right. So let's briefly mention why loops are important. So number one is automation. So loops reduce redundancy by automating repetitive tasks. And this is again a very fundamental concept when it comes to coding in general. So again, anytime that you find yourself copying and pasting the same block of code, so you need to stop. There is a chance that you can rewrite that task that involves copying and pasting a block of code with a for loop. So when it comes to writing code, less coding is always better. Number two, scalability. Okay, instead of manually writing at 100 lines, loops can scale the task with a few lines of code. Okay, so then these two go together. Okay, automation and scalability. And number three, we have code simplifications. Loops make your code cleaner, more readable, and easier to maintain. And especially when you're working on projects and you are writing code, you know, you're going to be collaborating with others. So having clean code is very, very important because that will help you and that will help others to understand what you did. And so then that way the collaboration becomes much easier. Okay. So those are the three importances of loops. Okay. Now let's review the syntax associated to for loops and the syntax associated to while loops. So in essence, this is how a for loop will look like. So you start with a keyword for, so then that's a keyword. And then as I mentioned a few seconds ago, you need an iterator. And typically it's going to be a letter, okay? I, J, K, those are very common labels. So I like to use I, so I in range. And then here is where you specify the starting point. And this is the ending point. Okay, so let me spell this correctly. Okay, basically what the range does, so range from A to B, so this generates a sequence of integers that starts at A, then A plus 1, then A plus 2, then dot dot dot, B minus 2, then B minus 1. That's the last integer that range generates. Okay, so basically these two lines of code right here, what they're doing is they are just printing the integers from 1 to 5. So in the console or in the output of the code, we're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's basically the structure of a for loop. So you start with the keyword for, an iterator, which is, in my case, I always use I, and then in, which is another important component, and then range. So then that's where you specify the starting point and the ending point. And then below that, and keep in mind the indentation that we see here, so you need to indent the code of the block of code that you want to execute, and that's basically it. Okay, it's pretty easy to understand. There is no much science to say when it comes to writing a for loop in Python. Now let's go to the syntax associated to while loops in Python. So while loops are slightly different, again, as I mentioned before. So for while loops, we need a condition that is going to be evaluated. And as long as that condition is true, then the while loop will keep running. Okay, so you start with the keyword while. So that's a keyword. And then after that, then you're going to have the condition to be evaluated. And as long as that condition that is placed right next to while, so the loop will keep running. Okay, so as long as this is true, as the condition is true, the loop will keep running. And that's what we need to be careful, and then we need to make sure that at some point that condition becomes false. So then that way the loop stops. Okay, and then another important component here is also note indentation. Okay, indentation. Okay, so we start with while, then a condition that is going to be evaluated. Then right below that, you need to indent, and then you need to enter the block of code that you want to execute. So in this case, we are using a while loop to print the numbers 1 to 5. So the first value, or the initialization is 1, and then it goes here and it checks for that. Okay, so 1 is less than equal than 5. That is true. So because that is true, then this gets executed, and then it goes to this line. When you see this, I plus 1, I plus equal 1, so then basically this means I is equal to I plus 1. That's basically it. Okay, so this notation plus followed by an equal, so then that means this. Okay, so then basically after the I value is printed, then we add 1 to I. Okay, and then it goes again, it goes all the way to the top of the loop. The condition will get evaluated, and as long as that condition is true, then it goes to print I, then I is equal to I plus 1, and then it goes again to the top, and it keeps iterating in that fashion. And as long as I is less than equal than 5 is equal to true, these two lines will keep executing. Okay, that's basically it. It's pretty simple. It's pretty simple to understand while loops in Python. Now let's go to the next section, which is common use cases. So common use cases for for loops and while loops. So this is one common case. So iterating through items such as lists or dictionaries. So lists or dictionaries are two common data structures, especially if you are in the analytics, data science, machine learning, or AI fields. So being familiar with lists and dictionary is essential because those are two data structures that will allow you to not only store data but also to manipulate data. Okay. Number two is you can perform operations on data sets by using loops. Okay. Yeah. Another common use case is automating repetitive user inputs or calculation. Again, if you find yourself copy and pasting the same code blocks, so you need to stop, and then there is a chance that you can rewrite that with a for loop. Now let's talk about some common drawbacks and cautions. Okay. Number one, infinitive loops, especially when it comes to while loops. Again, you need to make sure that the condition that is placed right next to the keyword while, we need to make sure that that condition at some point is false. Otherwise, the loop will keep running. Okay, it's not like it will keep running forever, right? It will keep running for some time, and depending how much computer power and how much memory your computer has, is at some point your computer will crash. Okay. Number two, performance issues. So loops can be slow, can slow down your program. Okay, and the reason for that is because in general Python is slow. Okay, because the purpose of Python wasn't to do computing. Okay, so if you compare Python, especially with C or C++, those two languages, they were developed. What I mean by those two languages, I'm referring to C and C++. They were developed to do computation. So then they are the fastest one, as far as I know. C and C++, they are the faster ones when it comes to loops and calculations. So even though that loops are really simple, you know, they are fast. At least Python loops, they are fast compared to other languages. They will slow down your program if it involves a lot of computation, or if there is a lot of data manipulation inside of that loop. It will slow things down. Readability. The overuse or complex nesting can make code harder to understand. So I've seen some code that have nested for loops. They have for loops inside for loop, so and inside another for loop, and then it becomes a little bit complicated. So try to avoid that situation. And if you find yourself doing that, maybe you can try something as, you know, creating a function to do you know, small chunks of the work instead of having multiple or multiple nested for loops. So all right, so especially when you're working with loops, so there are a couple of control statements that you need to be aware of. So the first one is break, and basically it's a statement that will break the loop. That's it. Okay, there is not much to be said. And then another statement that you need to be aware of is continue, and that basically what it does is it skips to the next iteration, and then pass does nothing, is just used as a placeholder. Okay, so based on my experience, I used this tool in the past many times. The best way to understand how to use these two particular statements is just by going through some examples. So here's just one basic example that highlights how you can use break and continue. So you want to print, for example, let's say the task is we want to print the numbers 1 to 10, but we want to skip 5 and we want to stop at number 8. Okay, so basically you start with a for loop for I in range from 1 to 11. So that will create the sequence of integers starting at 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. And then here we have two if statements. Okay, So here we're checking if I is equal to 5. If that is the case, then this gets executed. And basically what that does is whatever is below that continuous statement, it will get ignored, and then the loop will go all the way to the top again, or the code will go all the way to the top. Okay, and here what we're doing is we're checking if I is equal to A, and if that is the case, then this now gets executed, and then basically what it does is just stop the loop. It breaks the loop at that point. Okay, so what this code will print is the following. So we will see 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time that the I is equal to 5, so then becomes true, and then continue gets executed. So then that means that we don't see print I. And then I is equal to 6, so we will see 6. Then we will see 7. And then when I is equal to A, now this is true. And then this gets executed, and then at that point, the loop breaks. And that's it. This is the only integers that you will see if you run that code. Okay, so that highlights how you continue and break, how they work. Okay. In conclusion, so loops are fundamental in Python programming. Mastering them is key to writing efficient and effective code. Okay, so they're pretty easy to use. Yeah. And again, if you find yourself copying and pasting the same block of code, stop. There is a chance that you can rewrite that with a for loop or with a while loop. Okay, so now let's practice for loops and while loops with a couple of exercises. So all right, guys, now here we have a couple of exercises. So we have 8 exercises. Most of them, they rely on for loops. So then this is just, simple exercises that will clarify a couple of things related to for loops and while loops. Okay. All right, so the first exercise is use the for loop to print the numbers 1 to 10. So that should be very simple. So we start with for I, so that's the iterator in range 1, 11, column, and then print I. And that should do the job. So now we see here 1, 2, all the way up to 10. Very simple, okay? And we can also do the same with while loops. Okay, so then this is just to illustrate that while is also applicable here. We can start with I is equal to 1, and then I can say while I is less than equal than 10, print that, and then here I plus equals 1. And if I run this, so I get the exact same result. Okay, so that's just slightly different. This use while, and then here we're using for. Now let's move to the next exercise. So then write a for or write a loop to calculate the sum of the numbers 1 to 100. So it will be something along the following lines. So first, we're going to define a variable, and we're going to set the variable equals to 0, and that's going to be the variable that we're going to use to keep adding the values. So I'm going to call it total sum equals to 0. And then after that, I'm going to start my loop. So for I in range 1, 101, because we're adding 1 to 100. So then total sum, let's do it this way, total sum plus I. So we keep adding the I value, and that's iterating from 1 to 100. And then let's print the final result print. Okay. So the sum of the numbers 1 to 100 is 5,050. Okay, again, this is not an efficient way to do that type of calculation. I know that there is a formula, right? If you want to sum the first n number, it's just n times n plus 1 divided by 2, right? But again, in this case, we are highlighting how to use for loops and while loops. Exercise 3, it says print all even numbers from 1 to 20, and we can achieve that with a for loop. Okay, so we start with for I in range 1 comma 21, and then if I, the remainder of I divided by 2 is equal to 0, then we print that value. That's it. That's all we need. Okay, so yeah, so we see 2, 4, 6, 8, all the even numbers. Okay, so again, this is just the modulus operator, and basically what that does is just extract the remainder of the division by 2. Exercise 4 says write a while loop that counts down from 10 to 1. Okay, so we can start with I is equal to 10. Okay, and then while I is greater than equal than 1, then what do? We print I, and then we subtract 1. Okay, and then we see 10, 9, 8, all the way to 1. Again, what is important here is we need to make sure, especially with while loops, we need to make sure that at some point this condition is false. So then that way the loop will stop. Exercise 5, count the numbers of vowels in the string programming. So basically, vowels are A, E, I, O, and U. So we want to count how many of those are in this particular word. Okay, so we will start by defining text, which is in this case programming, and then vowels. So that, okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a for loop that it will go to each of these letters right here in programming, and it will check if that letter is part of the vowels. Okay, and we're gonna add 1 to the counting variable. So first we define a variable called number of vowels, and we set that equals to 0. Okay, so here we start with the for loop. For character in text, if the character is part of vowels, then we add 1. So then we can do this in this fashion. So then number vowels plus 1. So we add 1 to that count. That's basically it. Oops, I forgot to plus 1, and that's it. Then we print the number of vowels in the word programming is that. So it's 3. Okay, so there are 3 vowels. So then O, A, and I. So only 3 vowels. All right, exercise 6. So print the multiplication tables, the multiplication table of 3 up to 10. Okay, with a for loop. So this is very simple. So we start with for I goes from 1 to 10. Then we're gonna print the following. So we're going to print 3 times I equals, yes, equals 3 times I. So this will print 3 times 1 is equal to 3, 3 times 2 is equal to 6, 3 times 3 is equal to 9, all the way to 3 times 10 is equal to 30. Yeah, so again, this is just to get more and more familiar with for loops. I know that these exercises are simple, but again, this is just to get you familiar with for loops and while loops. Exercise 7 says loop through 1 to 10 and stop the loop when the number 7 is reached. Okay, this exercise will highlight how we can use the break statement. Okay, so we start with for I in range 1 to 11, and then if I is equal to 7, then we break the loop. Okay, and then otherwise we print I. So yep. So then basically again we only see 1 all the way up to 6. The moment the I is equal to 7, then this gets executed and then the loop breaks. So we don't see 8, we don't see 7, we don't see 8, 9, or 10. All right, so exercise 8 says print the numbers 1 to 10, but we need to or skip 4 and 5. So this exercise will highlight how you can use the continuous statement. So we start with 4, I in range 1 to 11. And then here we have the if statement. So if I is equal to 4 or I is equal to 5, if it's one of those two, then continue. So then that means skip. So it goes all the way to the top and then print will not get executed. So print I. Okay, so let's run this and then we have 1, 2, 3. And then when I is equal to 4, so then this statement is true and then continue gets executed. So then we go all the way to the top of the loop. Then I is equal to 5. And then again, this is true at that point. This gets executed and we don't see 5. And then when it's 6, so then this is all false. And then we see print I and so on. So yeah, this is the output. Okay. All right. So yeah, these exercises again highlights how you can use for loops, while loops, how you can use the break statement, how you can use the continuous statement. Okay, so that's all I have on this video. See you on the next one.